Site selection is now an energy access decision in 2026. Site selection is now an energy access decision, what companies must know before committing capital. For decades, location strategy ran on labor, logistics, and tax structure. Grid access is now the variable that determines whether a site can actually execute on the business case that selected it. Most location models are not built for that reality. The site selection process in most organizations follows a familiar sequence: labor market, logistics and supply chain proximity, real estate cost, regulatory and tax environment, infrastructure quality. Power availability appears somewhere on the checklist, but typically as a confirmatory step, not a filtering criterion. You verify that utility service exists, estimate the cost, and move on. That sequence is producing expensive errors in a growing number of markets. The organizations discovering this mid-project are the ones that will write the case studies everyone else references in 2 years. Why treating grid access as a confirmatory step in site selection is creating expensive errors. The specific failure mode looks like this. A company identifies a site based on traditional criteria: strong labor market, good logistics, favorable real estate cost. Capital is committed, permitting begins, groundbreaking follows. Then the energy assessment, conducted as a confirmatory step rather than a filtering criterion, reveals that the nearest substation is already operating near capacity. The interconnection process now requires an additional study that adds 6 months before any upgrade can even begin. At that point, the business has committed to a site that cannot support its operations on the timeline the business case requires. Every option remaining is costly. Wait for the utility at significant carrying cost. Invest in on-site generation to bridge the gap. Renegotiate the project timeline internally. Absorb the schedule miss and hope the financial model survives it. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory's interconnection queue data shows that the median time from interconnection application to commercial operations for new large loads in the U.S. has grown to over 4.5 years. That is not a footnote. That is a site selection filter, and it's not showing up in most location models. How grid capacity constraints have made U.S. geography uneven for energy-intensive facilities. Part of what makes this difficult is that grid capacity constraints are geographically uneven and not always intuitive. Some regions with strong economic development incentives are also regions with severely constrained grid infrastructure. Northern Virginia, arguably the world's highest density data center market, has become a case study in what happens when load growth dramatically outpaces infrastructure investment. Utilities serving the region have developed waitlist systems for new large load connections, something that would have seemed implausible a decade ago. The pattern isn't limited to data center markets. Manufacturing facilities, logistics hubs, healthcare campuses, and higher education institutions are all discovering that geographies they selected for conventional reasons carry energy access characteristics they didn't evaluate. Grid capacity, unlike labor market conditions or tax structures, isn't negotiable in the short term. The infrastructure is either there or it isn't. CBRE's 2025 site selection research found that energy availability and grid reliability moved into the top 5 location decision criteria for the first time in their annual survey of corporate real estate executives. That shift reflects a growing organizational awareness that treating power as a confirmatory input has produced enough visible failures to demand a process change. What best practice energy access due diligence looks like in site selection today? The leading practice now is clear. Energy infrastructure diligence begins at the same time as real estate screening, not after site selection. Utility interconnection capacity and timeline are treated as hard constraints in site scoring, not soft factors. Scenarios are modeled for both base case and delayed energization before capital is committed, so the business understands the financial exposure range before it makes the decision. Some companies are going further, proactively developing relationships with utilities in target geographies before identifying specific sites. They're understanding the capacity landscape at a regional level so that site selection happens within an already screened energy geography rather than producing surprises during the confirmatory phase. The business case for building grid access into location strategy before capital is committed In a market where grid access is constrained and unevenly distributed, knowing which geographies have available capacity and which don't is a genuine competitive advantage. The company that closes a site in 18 months while a competitor waits 36 months for a substation upgrade isn't just faster, it's generating returns on capital that the competitor is carrying without returns. In capital-intensive industries, that gap compounds. The organizations that start building energy access into their location strategy now, not as a compliance step, but as a strategic filter, are the ones whose expansion decisions will hold up under execution pressure. The ones still treating it as a confirmatory checkbox will keep writing the case studies. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.